patient died, and his physician says he's ready to see complete, give it up to him quickly. Cancer is a tolerable disease, but most people can, at the very least, delay spread by maintaining a positive outlook and mental attitude. This was not the case with Charles. Charles had a yellow streak a mile wide. Again, this is fake, but it's very believable. I had another slide I left at home, but there was Lance Armstrong demanding a rematch with cancer because he beat he'd taken him to the mat the last time. Now he's had so many problems, he needs to bounce back, so he wants cancer to come again. He'll beat it again.
The thing is, you can't police somebody's attitude towards their illness, and that you can't police someone's attitude towards anything in their life.
Exactly.
They have their attitudes, and
You got it.
depends on a lot of things, so it's absurd.
You're speaking like my good friend Barbara Ehrner. She wrote a book called Nickel and Dimes. What she did is she dropped out of graduate school and started cleaning houses and working at Kmart, big box stores, to learn what it was like to be poor. And it was awful. And they actually made a play out of her book, and it was a bestseller. She was working on another book, and then she developed breast cancer. And it was so inconvenient when she wanted to get her book done to have breast cancer. So we went to support group and said, I'm mad as hell to be here. It's keeping me from doing the things I want to do. No. If you have that attitude, your cancer will progress. So she wrote a book called Bright Sided about it, about how the relentless promotion of positive thinking was undermining America. But then she wanted to publish it in Britain, and they said, well, that won't work in Britain. Call it Smile or Die, which I like the title actually better. So the idea, the pressure was if she didn't smile, she would die quicker. And she and I really promote a liberationist view. People want to say, fuck cancer, let them. It's not going to affect their physical outcomes. If that's their natural attitude, then let them have it. You can't change the attitude, and it won't make a difference. And a full range of patient styles and coping need to be accommodated in cancer care. People may be familiar with the English writer John Diamond. He thought he had a non-fatal cancer and contracted to write a series of articles on it, and he ended up being a quite serious fatal cancer. And he wrote a book called Even Cowards Get Cancer. He describes at one point, everybody's telling him to have a positive attitude, look at the benefits of having cancer. He said he was tempted to send out Christmas cards, Merry Christmas, may you get cancer this year and get the benefits that I have. He said, whatever benefits he found, he's sure he discovered that some people really cared for him, but he was soon going to lose contact with his wife and kids. He was going to be dead, and there's no benefit to that. And I think it's a very profound book, written with great humor. So I was writing about positive psychology, and then this report came out, Understanding Psychosis and Schizophrenia, from the British Psychological Society. And it was radically denialist, from my point of view. It denied there was any biological aspect to schizophrenia. And at the same time, a paper came out about CBT in Lancet, and it was promoted that talking therapies were as effective as drugs in science of all places. The title was Schizophrenia, Time to Flush the Meds. Something you need to know about the media before you beat up another journalist. Journalists often write bad articles, but they don't get to choose their titles. And editors choose them without their permission. And so I sometimes really battered a journalist for good reason, but I went after them because of their title, not because of what they said in the article. In these particular cases, these were terrible headlines, and Professor Toni Morrison from Manchester was giving them this rubbish interpretation of the trial. So I began blogging about it, and when I looked at the Lancet paper, there were actually fewer participants stuck in the intervention group than there were authors at the end. They had, the comparison people was ill-defined, but some of them simply were thrown out of routine care because they wouldn't take their meds, so there was no comparison, certainly no control for expectations. A substantial portion of the patients assigned to CBT were getting medication by the end anyway, which was supposed to be the other condition. There was no evidence that response to cognitive therapy was comparable to that achieved with antipsychotic medication. This was totally a sell job. So I started going after the Understanding Psychosis and the book and the Lancet. And there was one blog about how little evidence there was in the Lancet paper. I got in a fight with Lancet because I accused them of publishing a paper that trial was registered after the start of the trial. And they said that was libelous, and then I said, please check the date of the registration. And they apologized to me, allowed me to state that in a letter. But then there's a ridiculous thing that's caused me lots of problems. I found that the president-elect of the British Psychological Society believed that Nazis are promoting a biomedical model, and that's traceable back to Nazi Germany, and that he was worried about being castrated, not because he was Jewish and the Nazi psychiatrists would get him, but because he had a brother who was odd, and that maybe he would be castrated as a way of sterilizing them. And after all, the right is rising in Europe. So I found this ridiculous thing and started saying that he was trivializing the Holocaust. And that's when he wrote to my university saying that I was rude and offensive, and that he threatened legal action against the dean at Groningen for paying my salary if I wasn't muzzled. He similarly threatened Sterling, and it caused a big laugh among my colleagues in the Netherlands. What court are they going to sue us in? Does that mean we have to go over to London and face this ridiculous man? If he thinks that someone's going to cut his penis and balls off because his brother is odd, he maybe needs psychological help. And so it didn't go over, but it pissed me off. And then ultimately he came out and said this advocating CBT for psychosis was not about CBT, it was about the politics of psychologists getting control from the physicians of the treatment of schizophrenia. And I don't know why he says these things, but I nailed him on that. And so now, stay tuned. Okay, but I have a history of attacking members of the psychiatry department in Oxford, not because the members of the psychiatry department in Oxford, but because they say dumb things. There was a trial of mindfulness-based therapy, which they claimed was ready to roll out to prevent relapse and recurrence, and I point out in my blog from the clinical trials point of view, it did nothing of the kind. It was just hype on the part of the self-promoting author. He then contacted the British press and said I had deviant American views and that he could recommend people who would be more appropriate to comment on his mindfulness trial. And then they came out with a trial which they claimed that an anti-worry treatment would reduce paranoid delusions. And the author of that, Friedman is his name, writes for the Guardian and started promoting his treatment and his self-help book in the Guardian. And so I went after the media, and the Guardian is now reconsidering their oversight of mental health treatment. The BBC changed their headline 3 hours after my blog attacked them. So I don't know, maybe just random events not related to what I'm doing, but I keep going at them. So I'll skip this slide about PACE. This is just a description that's provided by the investigators. Much of it is controversial, but it's treated as if it's not controversial. It's treated as factual. I just did that in case there was anybody here who didn't know about PACE. Much of what is said there is untrue, at least anything of substance. But PACE really attracts my attention because it's so goddamn bad. It's bad in its conduct, it's bad in its reporting, and it's fascinating that it's going unchallenged. and it's uncritically being passed on by journalists and the media with clear harm to patients. And there's murky politics around it all. So it's something I was ready to drop my interest in positive psychology and focus on PACE as an opportunity to teach people who have no interest in chronic fatigue or ME or post-viral syndrome, but are interested in how to interpret a clinical trial. It's grist for the mill. I can hopefully imagine sending my blog to graduate students studying clinical trials, and they'll learn how to conduct one badly and how to get away with reporting one badly. It's a great case study. So, my first blog post pointed out, and you have to understand, there's nothing that I'm saying in my blog post that the patient groups haven't been saying already. But I've got more of a standing somehow in this messed up system that I get taken seriously. So the first non-controversial point that I raised is that if you do a clinical trial, you don't look within group differences, you look at between group differences. And if the investigators had paid attention to that in the follow-up study, they had nothing to report because the group differences had gone away in the follow-up period. And to me, it's shocking. And I don't believe that the PACE investigators are incompetent. They know how to run a clinical trial. They knew what they were doing. So the other aspects is they did some really dodgy things. They randomly assigned people to groups. And then they're doing a follow-up based on the initial randomization. But in between the end of the treatment and the trial and the follow-up, they often let people go to other treatments. So they weren't being evaluated on their initial assignment. They were evaluating what was happening 2 years in a group that was very difficult to describe what was going on. And they also attempted to influence participants' reports of outcomes prior to the collecting of the data. They sent them newsletters that had glowing reports of how well people were doing. Now we know that the people assigned to the standard treatment, the specialist treatment, they didn't like that. A significant minority, I think about 41%, said they had no expectation to be helped by that. So there was obviously a lack of balance to begin with that was compounded by allowing people to switch treatment and by the letters. These are terribly dodgy things to do that anybody who's ever taken a course in clinical trials knows you don't do those things. And so they reported the data based on the initial assignment, not on the treatment that people were getting at the end of the follow-up. And then they used voodoo statistics to try to correct for all this. A statistician would tear their hair out looking at what they did. So then Keith Laws jumped in and pointed out the dissatisfaction with the standard medical care. It's really no care for a lot of patients with this condition. They were desperate to try something new. They were attracted to the promises that were made about the treatments being preferred by the investigators, and there was no positive expectations or hope in that condition. So it violated the basic condition of clinical trial. There was no equipoise. Ethically and clinically, you expected there to be a balance between treatments. And if there isn't a balance, then you shouldn't be doing a clinical trial. It's not ethical. Okay. And then he started getting into the mess trying to interpret the outcome variables. And actually, if you really get into the tables, the only treatment that showed not showing improvement was GEP. The grade exercise was the only, even people in standard care with the passage of 2 years had gotten a bit better. Okay, so what we're accusing the investigators of in our blog, and it's upsetting that we are established senior faculty We're saying that they inappropriately attempted to influence outcomes. We're saying that they're allowing patients to get other treatments, nullified it as a clinical trial. We're saying they distorted their interpretations. And these are serious charges. So essentially, two academics were saying what all the community was already saying, that there's a major mess up in PACE, in the conduct and in the reporting. And what's amazing is that no one was catching it. And they must have known what they were doing. We can only assume they believed that the editor and reviewers at Lancet Psychiatry would let them get away with it. And obviously they did. They didn't get caught in peer review. Competent peer review should have caught it. The media should have caught it. They should have gotten somebody independent of PACE to say, does this claim make sense? Or is it just an exaggerated self-promotion? And obviously there's something wrong in Britain that this didn't happen. And I personally think the PACE investigators were not inclined to challenge the release of their data before. They certainly can't now. They're in a bind. If they try to stop release of their data, they've basically been accused of hiding mistakes, and it won't stand. The scientific community won't stand. So that I think they can risk further damage to the reputation by fighting the appeal, or risk damage by things that are going to be revealed by the data being available. Because it's a Freedom of Information Act, it becomes available not only to that patient who asked for the data, but everybody in the world. PACE is at a real crisis. I think the psychological conceptualization of chronic fatigue, ME, is at a real crisis. The game has changed. And so I'm arguing that they shouldn't appeal, and they probably won't. They only have a week now. Next Monday, they have to have their appeal in. Otherwise, the data get released, I think that's a week or two later. I think we're going to be seeing the data. There are wonderful things hidden in that data. We can look at the actigraphy data, and we can see that there's no relationship between the physiological objective measures. Yeah.
When we do see the data set that is revealed,
Yeah.
how can we be confident that that is all of the data set and not a sanitized or selected or altered version?
Well, it's possible, but then it moves into the criminal realm.
Mm-hmm.
Altering clinical trial data is a very serious offense. And I think that the commissioner's already indicated that it's now going to be contempt of court. They've had an order, and if they alter it, that's not consistent with the spirit of the order. I think they'd be in danger of criminal contempt. I'm not a British lawyer, but I would, as an American, I would be scared shitless of that possibility. I mean, having caught some Americans altering data that was shared, I know the bind they're in, and these are prominent people in the United States. I would not want to be a PACE investigator. Yeah.
This has really been the last time for the cherry anyway in doing analysis of the data. So the stuff they're publishing now is as far as they can go, because the data has its limits, and so it will be after the fact anyway.
Exactly. Yeah, and this whole thing about intellectual. The thing I run up against in the States when I try to get data is to say it's intellectual property rights. We're going to publish more data. Hell, it's been a long time since the initial publication. Go on with the additional follow-up, but you're not doing additional follow-up. You've got the follow-up, you've got the initial data. What intellectual property is at stake? It's a rubbish argument. No one, now that they're being criticized by the scientific community, the game has changed. They can't get away with that. Anybody know what meow means? It's an American term. It's not a sound cat makes. Yeah, I'm doing, it's meow for me right now. The moral equivalent to war. It comes from William James. And ironically, William James referred his sister for treatment of her neurasthenia to Weir Mitchell. But the idea is that It's from William James, that I was already busy, shooting up bad clinical trials. I was busy going after journals. Now I'm going to refocus the activity on PACE and the associated ideology. And I'm only one person. It's not a war against people, it's a war against practices and assumptions. And rather than doing the positive psychology thing, the focus of my work is to see how much we can degrade bad science being badly reported. Expose more of the bad science, the QRPs of PACE, establish culpability of journal editors and reviewers in questionable practices and getting out there, educate media and journalists on the responsibilities that they have not exercised in reporting PACE. They're going to be called to task for that. And I want to expand to other questionable research practices. Like, it's fascinating that the largest trial before
Sorry, just talking to myself.
Oh.
I'm just agreeing with that wee talk bit about the maintained illusion that there's validity to psychosomatic model.
Well, like one of my next targets after I discuss the control group problem, and once I get through discussing it, everybody will see, and they'll say, whiskey, tango, foxtrot, How did they get away with not having an adequate control group? But my next target is, there's the largest trial